This is Finance Arcana, and today, on episode 6 of Forbidden History, we're breaking down the great Chinese silver drain, how the world's richest empire went bankrupt. And trust me, this story is wild, huge stakes, insane twists, and a truth about global money that almost nobody talks about. Let us jump straight in. For centuries, the Ming Dynasty stood as the wealthiest and most powerful civilization on the planet. Its cities were enormous, its bureaucracy unmatched, its markets overflowing with goods the world craved: silk, porcelain, tea. The Ming economy was so advanced that Western observers described it as a world unto itself. But here's the forbidden claim. The Ming Dynasty didn't fall because of corruption or foreign invasion. It fell because its monetary system quietly imploded. A global shortage of silver, the backbone of Ming taxation and state finance, strangled the empire from within. Shock data: by the mid-1500s to early 1600s, nearly 33% of all silver mined on Earth flowed into Ming China. Spanish galleons crossed the Pacific, carrying treasure from Potosi. Japanese merchants shipped bullion across the East China Sea, and the Ming state absorbed all of it because emperors had replaced traditional taxes with a single, rigid monetary obligation. All taxes must be paid in silver. Not copper, not grain, only silver. The richest empire in Asia became completely dependent on a global metal supply it didn't control. How does the strongest empire in the world, a civilization with unmatched production, culture, and human capital, go bankrupt because of a currency it didn't even mine? The answer hides inside the Ming fiscal reforms: global trade networks, collapsing mines, and a monetary architecture so inflexible that a minor disruption became a fatal shock. When Japan restricted silver exports in the 1620s, Ming markets convulsed. Prices spiked, tax payments halted, and regional treasuries reported shortages within weeks. It was the world's first global liquidity crisis. Would you have seen this coming?
To understand this collapse, we need to step into the geopolitical world of Ming China, a world where wealth was vast, bureaucracy was massive, and global trade revolved around the empire like planets around a sun. China didn't just participate in the world economy, it shaped it, becoming the gravitational center for silver-based commerce. Imagine today's dollar dominance. Now, flip it. In the 1500s, silver was the global reserve currency, and China was the Federal Reserve. Every trader from Manila to Mexico City needed Chinese demand to validate the value of their silver. This is where a powerful analogy emerges. China functioned like a massive black hole of monetary metal. Silver went in, and almost never came out. Polanyi famously wrote about markets being embedded in society, and Ming China was the ultimate example. The tax system forced peasants, merchants, and officials into a single metallic dependency. It wasn't just a currency, it was the empire's operating system. When your entire system relies on a single input, a shock becomes fatal. Reinhardt and Rogoff would later call this the single-pillar fragility of pre-modern states. Pause and imagine. What happens to a superpower when the world suddenly stops giving it the fuel it depends on? By 1580, Spanish silver fleets became so tied to Chinese demand that European kings adjusted monetary policy based on Ming fiscal decisions. This level of interdependence was unprecedented and dangerous. What do you think? Could any empire survive a model like this today? Now, let's meet the key players in this monetary drama. A cast of emperors, merchants, miners, pirates, and global financiers who unknowingly built the system that would later collapse. At the top sat the Ming court, ritualistic, confident, and tragically rigid. The bureaucracy believed that demanding silver taxes made governance cleaner and corruption harder. In theory, yes. In practice, it concentrated risk at a level no one understood. The Ministry of Revenue became the empire's unofficial central bank, fixated on maintaining stable silver flows. Then came the merchant guilds, especially those in Fujian and Guangdong. These were not simple traders. They were sophisticated global operators. They coordinated with Spanish intermediaries in Manila, struck deals with Japanese smugglers, and controlled silver's final pricing inside China. In many ways, they were the most powerful private financial networks in Asia. Centuries before formal banking emerged, the Fujian Silver Syndicate of the early 1600s. When silver imports slowed, they manipulated domestic prices by hoarding metal, triggering artificial scarcity. Their actions resemble early versions of commodity cornering, the same tactic, the hunt. Brothers tried with silver in 1980. Also in the shadows were the Woko pirates, who disrupted shipping routes. A single pirate season could delay flows enough to spike prices across entire provinces. If you lived in that era, whose actions do you think mattered more? Emperors, miners, or merchants? As Asimoglu and Robinson would argue, institutions shape destiny. Here, the institution was the silver tax system itself, and its rigidity made collapse inevitable once shocks arrived. By the early 1600s, pressure inside the Ming economy was rising like steam in a sealed chamber. On the surface, everything looked stable: bustling markets, full granaries, and steady tax revenues. But underneath, the empire was becoming dangerously dependent on a global silver pipeline it did not control. A pipeline vulnerable to storms, pirates, foreign edicts, and geological exhaustion. A single disruption could shake the fiscal foundation of the largest state in the world. As silver inflows slowed from Japan, partly due to Tokugawa reforms, partly due to mine depletion, cracks began appearing. Local governments struggled to collect taxes because peasants couldn't acquire enough metal. Officials hoarded silver to meet quotas. Markets saw rising volatility. And yet, the court insisted nothing was wrong. This denial echoes Kindleberger's classic pre-crash pattern: elites misreading structural stress as temporary fluctuations. One hidden pattern was the mismatch between silver-denominated taxes and the copper-based economy used by ordinary people. If copper prices rose, but silver didn't, real tax burdens exploded, squeezing farmers even when harvests were strong. It was an early example of monetary dualism, a dangerous divergence similar to what Friedman warned occurs when money supply can't adapt to economic reality. Records from Shandong reveal villages where people began selling land simply to obtain silver for taxes. Land fragmentation grew, rural credit collapsed, and local power shifted to moneylenders. When your tax system forces asset liquidation, collapse becomes more a countdown than a possibility. If your entire financial system depended on one inflow you didn't control, how long could you survive? The first major domino fell suddenly, and from thousands of miles away. In the 1620s, Spanish America was hit with declining mine output due to labor shortages, mercury disruptions, and political turmoil. Silver shipments across the Pacific fell sharply. At the same time, Japan further tightened export restrictions. The result, China's monetary bloodstream constricted almost overnight. This was the Ming Empire's equivalent of a modern liquidity shock. Imagine the US dollar supply shrinking by 20 to 30% in a single decade. Prices would collapse, debts would spike, and governments would scramble. That's exactly what happened in China. Grain prices plunged, silver became scarce, and tax defaults exploded. The ripple effects spread through every layer of society. This sudden stop dynamic mirrors what Reinhardt and Rogoff call sudden external financing reversals. The mechanism is universal. The bigger your dependence on external flows, the harder you fall when they stop. In Zhejiang, local records show farmers offering 3 years of harvests for a single tael of silver, and still being rejected. That level of desperation reveals how distorted the system had become. Would you have recognized a liquidity collapse happening around you if you lived through one? Or would it have looked like ordinary hardship? Once the first domino fell, the empire was no longer in control. The monetary engine had misfired, and no domestic tool could fix it.
Every great financial collapse has a hidden actor, a force shaping the crisis from the shadows. In this story, that actor was global silver geology itself. Silver was not just a currency, it was a finite resource whose production peaked, plateaued, and declined according to natural limits no emperor could command. Geological reality became destiny. As American mines, especially Potosi, suffered declining quality, extraction costs soared, native labor systems broke down, mercury supplies faltered, and Spanish officials faced revolts. Even before the Ming court sensed danger, the earth itself was quietly closing the tap. In 1592, Potosi produced roughly 13 million pesos of silver. By the 1620s, output fell drastically. This wasn't a political failure, it was resource exhaustion. When your money supply is tied to a physical commodity whose extraction peaks, the system becomes a prisoner of geology. A pattern echoed centuries later in gold standard crises. European merchants noticed shortages first. Manila traders complained that each year's galleon arrived lighter than the last. Chinese merchants responded by raising silver's purchasing power domestically, making taxes even harder to pay. This resembles Friedman's warning that deflationary spirals emerge when money supply contracts, while fiscal demands remain fixed. The Ming state demanded the same taxes, while silver availability collapsed. When your economy is built on a metal you don't produce, who really controls your fate? Comment below and let us know. Now the crisis in the Ming Dynasty enters its sharpest phase, the liquidity squeeze. Silver inflows didn't just decline, they collapsed between 1620 and 1640. Some regions saw a reduction of more than 50%. For an empire whose taxes, salaries, military funding, debt repayment, and market confidence all hinged on silver availability. This was a systemic failure. The economy began seizing up like an engine running out of oil. Tax defaults surged. Farmers who couldn't obtain silver were classified as delinquents, even when their harvests were abundant. Officials who were supposed to collect taxes instead began fleeing posts. Soldiers went unpaid. Local markets slowed as merchants refused to trade without metal. Inflation hit some goods. Deflation hit others. The price system itself fractured. This is like the 2008 credit freeze, except instead of banks refusing to lend, the metal backing the entire financial system disappeared. Imagine ATMs running dry globally, while taxes still demanded cash. That's the Ming world. Historians describe villages abandoning currency entirely, reverting to barter. But even barter wasn't enough because taxes still required silver. This mismatch destroyed confidence, echoing Kindleberger's model of panic. Once market participants believe the system can't deliver obligations, they withdraw, accelerating collapse. The empire's massive bureaucracy became a liability. With each level of administration consuming silver, shortages cascaded upward. Provincial treasuries wrote desperate memorials. We cannot meet quotas with a currency that people cannot buy. Think about this. What happens when a government demands a form of money that no longer exists in adequate supply? Comment below and let us know.
At this point, the fatal flaw in Ming Dynasty's China economic architecture was exposed. The state had no alternative currency mechanism. There was no fiat option. No institutional framework for issuing paper backed by trust. No flexible tax conversion. The empire had locked itself into a single metallic system, a brittle monoculture. As silver dried up, the imperial government faced an impossible triangle: raise taxes, reduce spending, or find new silver. It attempted all three and failed each time. Raising taxes merely increased defaults. Cutting spending outraged soldiers and triggered desertions. Searching for new silver sources led to frantic, sometimes absurd policies like encouraging trade with regions that had already stopped exporting metal. If the world stopped delivering the one thing your financial system depends on, what policy could possibly save you? Economic historians interpret this as a classic Polanyi moment, when a market mechanism here, silver pricing becomes disembedded from social realities. People needed to eat, marry, harvest, fight, and survive. Yet all obligations were denominated in a substance they could no longer access. The monetary system no longer reflected the needs of the population. It became an oppressive abstraction. In the Yangtze Delta, landowners who once thrived began selling family heirlooms to meet silver obligations. Pawn shops flourished, but even they refused anything except precious metal. This contraction of acceptable payment forms mirrors modern liquidity crises where banks stop accepting collateral they previously trusted. This is similar to the Great Depression gold standard trap, a rigid metallic regime strangling economic activity because policymakers refuse to break the rules. How long can any system survive when its core rule becomes impossible to follow? Similarly, when do you think the US dollar-backed empire will end? Comment below to let us know. By the 1630s, in Ming Dynasty China, the crisis spiraled into full-blown social and political collapse. Silver scarcity turned every local dispute into a fiscal emergency. With tax failures everywhere, the Ming state lost its ability to pay troops. Hungry soldiers mutinied. Frontier defenses weakened. Bandit armies formed, swelling with desperate farmers who couldn't meet silver obligations. The empire's monetary shock had now become a political wildfire. Li Zicheng's rebel movement gained momentum precisely because the tax system had broken. Villagers joined him not just out of anger, but because rebellion became the only way to escape silver debt. In a tragic twist, the monetary collapse engineered the conditions for the empire's overthrow. This dynamic resembles how hyperinflation and fiscal collapse fed political extremism in Weimar Germany. When a state loses control of its money, it loses legitimacy. People turn to alternatives, radicals, rebels, strongmen, anyone who offers stability. One county record notes that by 1639, not 1 in 10 households could pay silver taxes. Families abandoned land, fleeing into mountains. Markets emptied. Grain rotted in storage because no one could buy it without silver. The economy didn't just slow, it disintegrated. As Friedman would argue, monetary contraction, on this scale, is fatal, not because markets fail, but because trust fails. Once people believe the monetary system cannot fulfill obligations, they stop participating. Collapse becomes self-reinforcing. If you lived through such a crisis, would you blame the emperor or the money itself? Comment below and let us know. Now we reach the climax, the moment the structure finally gives way. In 1644, after decades of mounting fiscal paralysis, unpaid armies, and uncollected taxes, the Ming Dynasty fell. But it wasn't swords that killed it. It was silver. The empire's monetary engine had seized so completely that governance became impossible. The court couldn't mobilize troops, couldn't buy grain, couldn't fund defenses. A political giant found itself financially paralyzed. Winners and losers emerged quickly. Merchant elites who hoarded silver survived, even thrived. They became the liquidity kings of their era. But farmers, soldiers, and small officials, those dependent on stable money flows, were crushed. This uneven impact mirrors what modern economists like Reinhardt and Rogoff describe. Crises rarely hit evenly. They concentrate damage on those least able to hedge risk. Think of Argentina's 2001 collapse, bank freezes, currency failure, and cascading poverty. People with offshore dollars survived. People with pesos didn't. The Ming version was far worse, because silver wasn't just money, it was the sole legal tax medium. When it vanished, so did state capacity. Charles Kindleberger argued that great crashes occur when the stabilizer fails. The Ming had no lender of last resort, no flexible money supply, no institutional buffer. When shocks hit, they reverberated unchecked. During the final months, Beijing officials reported that grain suppliers refused to deliver because payment was uncertain. Even life-or-death necessities became hostage to monetary scarcity. The world's richest empire didn't fall from weakness, but from rigidity. A system too successful to change is a system waiting to collapse. Would you have realized the end was near? After the Ming Dynasty fell, China entered a long period of fragmentation, warfare, and rebuilding. But the monetary aftershocks of the silver crisis persisted far beyond the dynasty's collapse. The early Qing inherited a broken fiscal structure, a traumatized population, and a deeply suspicious merchant class. Trust in the monetary system had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. The Qing continued the silver tax model, but introduced more flexibility. Copper cash regained some prominence. Local officials were allowed to improvise. And importantly, the state gradually recognized that a single metallic dependency was unsustainable. But recovery was slow. Entire regions depopulated by rebellion took decades to stabilize. Some historians argue that the silver shock weakened China's ability to respond to later global changes, including European maritime expansion. By the time silver flows normalized in the 18th century, the world economy had shifted. China had stabilized. Yes, but at a cost. Its institutions had become more cautious, more conservative, and less adaptive. Reinhardt and Rogoff described debt intolerance, where countries that suffered major collapses remain wary for generations. China's reluctance to modernize its monetary system may reflect this trauma. What happens to a civilization when the very substance that once made it wealthy becomes the cause of its downfall? Pause and consider. Money isn't just a medium. It is the architecture of a society. When that architecture cracks, everything built on it must be rebuilt.
Now we connect the great Chinese silver drain to the world we live in today, because this wasn't just a historical monetary collapse. It was a preview, a warning, a mirror held up to global systems that still rely on confidence, liquidity, and the belief that money will always be there when we need it. The Ming Dynasty discovered the hard way that when money becomes scarce, society fractures. The same dynamic exists today. Only the assets have changed. In our world, the dominant monetary force is not silver, but the US dollar. Every emerging market, every commodity trade, every global bank depends on dollar liquidity. When the Federal Reserve tightens, dollars become harder to access and nations scramble. We saw it in 2008, in 2020, and again in 2022 to 2023 when dollar shortages hit countries from Pakistan to Argentina. Liquidity contraction behaves the same across centuries, silent at first, then devastating. But here's where the modern twist comes in. As traditional currencies strain under debt and monetary tightening, Bitcoin and crypto assets have emerged as an alternative monetary experiment. A decentralized asset with a fixed supply, the opposite of silver mines and dollar printing. And yet, Bitcoin faces its own liquidity shocks, sudden inflows during bull markets, violent outflows during crashes, and volatility that mirrors early commodity cycles. It is both new and ancient at the same time. In 2021 to 2022, Bitcoin's liquidity dried up across exchanges as leverage unwound. Prices collapsed because the system had no lender of last resort, a dynamic eerily similar to the Ming monetary trap. When liquidity evaporates, even the strongest narratives crack. Viewer question: could a future monetary world, split between dollar dominance and decentralized digital assets, face the same fragility the Ming to systems competing for trust? Both vulnerable to sudden shocks. Reflection moment. Pause and consider. Are we building a more resilient global system, or simply repeating history in digital form? Comment below.
Now we uncover the hidden lessons, the insights buried inside this catastrophe that modern investors, policymakers, and global macro thinkers cannot afford to ignore. At the heart of the Ming collapse lies a structural truth. monetary systems fail not at their weakest points, but at their most rigid ones. The moment flexibility disappears, fragility takes its place. Major finance book insight. Reinhardt and Rogoff often emphasize that crises become lethal when obligations remain fixed while liquidity evaporates. That describes the Ming silver tax perfectly. No matter how abundant grain or labor became, none of it mattered if silver was scarce. The monetary architecture suffocated real economic strength. Your portfolio can be diversified, sophisticated, well-researched, but if it hinges on one fragile assumption, it can still collapse. Single-point dependency is the silent killer of systems. Whether it's reliance on one asset class, one country's monetary policy, or one commodity, the hidden risk compounds quietly until a shock arrives. Think about highly leveraged positions that perform beautifully until volatility spikes, or currency carry trades that work flawlessly until liquidity dries up. The Ming Empire's mistake wasn't choosing silver, it was building everything around it. Early Qing officials studied the monetary collapse of the Ming Dynasty in great depth and noted that taxation required a money the people cannot find. Their conclusion: systems must meet the population where they are, not where theory assumes they should be. A lesson Acemoglu and Robinson echo: institutions survive when they adapt to real conditions. If your wealth strategy depended on one external variable, would you notice when that variable began to shift? Here's the warning: not as historians, but as observers of the modern global financial machine. The Ming Dynasty Great Chinese Silver Drain debacle teaches us that monetary monopolies are dangerous, even when they seem stable. Today, the world is deeply dependent on the US dollar. Trade invoices, commodity pricing, debt servicing, financial markets, all orbit around dollar liquidity. Imagine a shock where global access to dollars contracts by 20 to 30%. Maybe through geopolitical conflict, sanctions, a US banking crisis, or extreme tightening by the Federal Reserve. Suddenly, emerging markets face cascading defaults. Commodity exporters can't service debts. Banks freeze credit. Corporations scramble to roll short-term funding. Global trade slows. This chain reaction would mirror the Ming collapse, a dominant monetary asset becoming scarce. If a modern crisis made your primary currency unstable or inaccessible, how would you hedge? Would you diversify? Or would you hope the system holds? Kindleberger notes that crises escalate when there is no stabilizer. In today's world, the stabilizer is the Federal Reserve, but even it has limits. And when confidence wavers, everything linked to the dollar wavers with it. The Ming Emperor never imagined that silver could run out. Today, many can't imagine a world where dollar liquidity dries up. But systems built on assumptions eventually meet reality. The warning is simple: power depends on money, and money depends on trust. Break that trust, and even superpowers fall.
So here we are, the finale, a moment to step back from the numbers, charts, rebels, merchants, and emperors, and ask the deepest question of all: what truly bankrupts a civilization? It's rarely a single event. It's the slow accumulation of hidden pressures, rigid systems, and blind spots that no one questions until they explode. The Great Chinese Silver Drain wasn't just a monetary crisis. It was a philosophical one. It revealed how even the richest empire on earth can collapse when its financial architecture becomes disconnected from the lived reality of its people. When money becomes scarce, trust evaporates. When trust evaporates, institutions crumble. And when institutions crumble, history accelerates. Money is not wealth. It is a shared belief, a story we all agree to participate in. When that story fractures, chaos steps in. The Ming fell because its story of silver no longer matched the world around it. Today's global economy runs on digital dollars, debt pyramids, and liquidity networks that span the world in milliseconds. They feel strong. They feel permanent. But so did the Ming silver system, until it didn't. Pause and think, what parts of today's system are we assuming will never break? Tell us in the comments what topic you want us to uncover next. Thanks for watching The Great Chinese Silver Drain, how the world's richest empire went bankrupt. If this episode blew your mind even a little, smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves crazy finance stories, and hit subscribe so you never miss the next big reveal on Finance Arcana. We have more wild episodes coming in our forbidden history. You will not want to miss them.